Hello, welcome back to stage 2 at FinTech LIVE London 2024. Thanks for joining us here in the room. Thanks for joining us online. Really good to have you with us. For the last, I'm afraid, session of the day from stage 2 anyway, FinTech fraud and ID verification. And you've met two of our panelists already, and delighted to welcome to the stage as well Matt Cumbers, Chief Risk Officer at Cushon, part of the NatWest Group. So welcome all three. Thank you for joining us. If there's any questions, I'm going to be looking around as my colleagues are talking, and so if you want to bung your hand up in the room, we'll go to questions whenever we can. And those of you online, use the app, and your questions will come directly to my tablet, and I'll pass those questions on. So, FinTech fraud and ID verification, a vast subject in itself, and for a lot of people either here or watching who are not experts, who are maybe new to this, just set the scene. Who's doing it? Who are the actors? Is it big states? Is it organized crime? Is it small actors? Who's doing it?
Well, I mean, we see a whole host of actors, unfortunately. I suppose if I think about the last couple of years, we've started to see a great deal of coordinated criminal gangs who are exploiting known vulnerabilities, particularly in relatively youthful organisations. So we've seen that with some of the challenger banks. Cushon, I put ourselves in the same sort of frame of reference, really. So it is interesting. When one vulnerability is identified, that is quite quickly shared. So you'd be surprised about how much you're opened up to, unfortunately, quite quickly.
Any further input into that?
No, the only thing I would say, in addition to what Matt said, we're seeing an increasing trend with state-sponsored perpetuation of both fraud and
Sure.
criminal activity. I don't have the exact stats, but it's gone up dramatically over the last decade.
So look, that's an interesting scene setter. So can we talk about the trends you're seeing and the challenges that you're facing from your different perspectives?
Yeah, so I think one of the key trends for us is most customers are still good. I feel like that needs to be said out loud. The majority of the people seeking to transact, to onboard, to hold currencies are average everyday people who are looking to not do anything more awful than send money to their grandmother. And what we try to focus on as much as possible is, how do you handle the vast majority of people that are using the platform as intended and make their lives simple while still preventing, as you're mentioning, state-sponsored gangs, sanctions evasion is another big one. So that's really the balance that we try to focus on as much as possible.
Jazz, what trends and challenges?
Couldn't agree more based on what Daniel just said. But I think it's also about the sophistication of the criminals, right? We're in a, dare I say, a bit of a race where you put in more sophisticated controls and measures and tools and technology to prevent crime, and the criminals are working equally hard as to how to overcome them. So this is like a never-ending battle, right? You got to keep evolving. There is no finishing line, so to say, where you say, yeah, I've done that, put my feet up, and there's nothing of that order. I think that pace of evolution is only increasing, is how I see it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I kind of wonder if they have their own conferences and share best practice. I don't know. Certainly feels like it at times. But I completely agree with what Jazz is saying, and that's probably not what you want to hear, really. But make use of the service providers that we've got, but then also think about what else you can do in terms of your controls on a manual basis, etc. Training your people, really starting to think holistically about the vast majority of your customer base. There's nothing more that you can be done than that. It's really utilise the brain capital that you've got in your organisation.
I guess a lot of people are immediately thinking the future is AI, because the future of everything is AI, apparently. But I mean, it strikes me it's just an arms war. The more AI and the cleverer AI you deploy, the more they deploy. I mean, is it as simplistic as that? Where are we going with AI?
I mean, we see a whole host of different applications. I mean, a lot of my role is creation of the policy framework. So creation of the policies, rolling them out, embedding them, testing their working, and pursuing that virtuous cycle of improvement over time. We see huge opportunity to make use of AI in both writing it, interpreting it. So another part of my team advises on regulatory interpretation. So making use of AI to do that. You know, we see opportunities in terms of product development as well to make all of that automated. So you've got one AI talking to another. That's the sort of utopian direction. And then you end up with more sophisticated residual actions that are done by people. So we see a huge opportunity, certainly in terms of framework activity.
I think we also see a threat, and by the way, Matt, I'm stuck on your idea of the criminal conference. It's quite a mental image. But one of the key places that we see the threat coming in is around synthetic media for identity verification. So when you talk about, there's a great quote from one of the chief data ethicists at Google last year, saying that essentially we're now in a place where all content-based verification is broken, because it is almost impossible to really trust that voice content, that video content, that image content is authentic and is not manipulated or generated in some way. So one of the things that we see in response to AI is an increased dependence on primary source data. So it's much simpler to generate a false passport with a name on it than it is to actually insert that name and detail into an official government registry in that country. So what we're seeing is yes, use of AI tools to combat AI tools, but also reliance on authoritative and independent data sources to confirm the content that's presented to us.
Look, if I may add, I think the way I see it is you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, right? Like you said, the vast majority of one's customers are trying to do the right thing. They are not criminals. It's how do you find that one transaction which goes back and ties to criminal activity. So that's where I think AI can help to make sure that we are getting more pinpointed towards a human brain looking at and analyzing a lesser number of transactions rather than crawling through hundreds of thousands of transactions to find that one which relates to criminal activity. How can you be more pointed at that and use machine intelligence to be able to say, I've refined based on whatever criteria any financial institution has, and get them more pinpointed because you've got a greater chance and probability of preventing that crime from happening.
But every fintech wants to reduce friction, and there's that trade-off, isn't there? You can have friction, or you can have fraud, and somewhere you've got to meet in the middle. And where is that meeting point?
One of our colleagues likes to joke that he can create the perfect frictionless onboarding system. You just let everyone in. No delays, no friction, and massive fraud. So and crime and everything else. So I think we have to adopt the concept of positive friction. Some amount of friction is good. Some people should be rejected from entering your platform. Some people should be delayed in entering your platform. So there's one of the jokes I constantly hear thrown around is that friction's the new F word. And in some cases that's true, but there is good friction out there, and particularly when applied to the right demographics, the right amount of friction is appropriate.
I think about this, right? As a customer, I'm trying to make a payment to send to my grandmother, using your example, and then what happens is I get prevented from sending that payment because it goes into a black hole because the financial institution sees some marker, right, based on whatever systems and controls they have in the background. And I don't hear back for a period of time. That to me is bad friction, right? However, there is also, at the same time, in parallel, I'm trying to help you prevent a fraudster from trying to take your money, because that happens 9.9 out of 10 times as well. What we need to do better is that communication element with customers to say, this is what we're doing as a financial institution, as a bank, and for XYZ reason. That's what we need to get better at, which is then acceptable friction, because you're trying to protect my money rather than it just going, and particularly in the UK with faster payments, once the money goes, it goes. right? There's no bringing it back. That's the reality because it's real-time payments. So I think that element of keeping the customer in the loop and communicating the rationale, everybody's an adult, they understand it. That's what we need to get better at.
And faster payments presumably has been a real driver towards increased security, as there are many drivers. And how do you in practice improve that communication you talk about? Is it simply a matter of communication, or do you have to educate your customers to accept greater friction?
I think there is a huge piece around customer education, and that's growing. I mean, consumer duty puts that at the forefront of most people's minds across multiple risk types. And I think customers, to Jazz's point, customers are understanding why there is friction now. I think you saw that last week in the documentary from the BBC. There are these huge horror stories out there, and I think people are understanding that friction actually is there to protect them as much as it is to protect the FIs as well.
Are you worried? Has there been a shift? I'm thinking of certainly in the UK and the new rules around APP crime and the fact that banks have to compensate members of the public. Is there a shift of responsibility there, away from members of the public, customers, to do their own personal due diligence and not to give away their own ID? And the burden has now been shifted to the banks. Is that unfair, or is that a good thing?
I think it's got to be a balance, right? And it cannot be one way or the other. And it's not just between the customer and the financial institutions, the FIs, but also where the crime is perpetuated, right? The bulk of fraud scams, for example, are perpetuated on online social media platforms. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a combination of your big tech organizations, your financial institutions, and education with customers. To your point, Matt, it's a combination of all three. I don't think it's the responsibility only lies with the customer, with the individual, or only with the bank. It's got to be, equally spread, and that's what we're as a financial services industry with UK Finance. That's what we're in talk with the government to say.
They're very worried about that shift of responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a question from a gentleman at the front. I'm looking for the microphone. The microphone is at the back of the room, being run round. Right at the front here, Julian. Known for his high speed. Sir.
So, sorry to interrupt you in that flow, but it was about education, right? So I think the question I have is based on observation. I've got 2 young kids. Financial education, not something they're taught. You should teach kids at a younger age how to manage their money, etc. And we're actually in a stage or an era where the younger generation, their identity doesn't have a lot of value to them. They're happy to give it away for a Starbucks voucher, right? So we're in a very kind of scary era, and I think it's going to get worse. So my question to the panel is, we talk about education. How are we going to educate? What are the kind of strategies that you're looking to adopt, whether that's directly to end customers or via government? I'd love to hear what those look like, and that's more on a personal level as well.
Sure. I mean, for us, I think it's the same for a lot of the big banks. We're tying in sort of junior financial education with the product set. So we've got Rooster Money that helps to educate and actually empower kids to make use of their money in the right way. So you have an opportunity then to wrap around the education on some of those probably slightly less interesting subjects than spending money, but protecting your identity, as you say, absolutely crucial for future longevity. Sure, it's the same.
So the whole ethos of Santander is based on education, actually. You'll see us very heavily invested in educating school-going kids, high school kids, A-level kids, to our tie-up with universities. We tie up with 120 universities and university-going kids to make sure that there is financial inclusion and financial understanding or financial planning, big part of it. And we've just launched what is called as the Santander Open Academy, which is both about financial skills amongst other skills of the future. So it cuts across society, starting with kids at a young age, because we don't have that emphasis in our school curriculum, unfortunately. So I believe that the onus is on us as financial institutions to take on the mantle in providing that to kids at a young age, and then as they mature, then there will be a better understanding of how to manage and protect your money.
Any other questions for now? Another gentleman at the front. And did I see a hand over here? No. Yeah.
We just spoke about the fact that there is a race between the financial institutions, the public, as well as the criminals, who can be more sophisticated. So does it, as a financial institution, make you worry that the world of the sophistication of criminals is reaching to a stage where it is going beyond the capacity of human brain to stop it? And we have no other choice but to become software experts, AI experts, whatever you want to call it, to keep pace with them, and the human in the loop is becoming less and less effective. What's your view on that?
I mean, it's certainly a huge challenge. I mean, one of the things to look at the moment is the use of quantum computing to crack encryption. That is something that poses a huge challenge for a lot of what we've got and how things are based. I don't think it stops. I think the innovation race continues for the foreseeable future. I don't see an end to it, but interested in the rest of the panel's views.
Yeah, I mean, I think attended an interesting talk 2 weeks ago on quantum computing, and it is very interesting. But I think the point maybe you're getting towards is even as important as education is, we can get to this overconfidence, right? I'm not going to send some Nigerian prince, my banking details in response to a poorly written email. I am invulnerable to fraud. I am invulnerable to financial crime. And the reality is that's not true for any of us. And I think there is a bit of humility that needs to happen for all the human beings involved.
I think I've got a view, which is, I think you look at the nature of crime. 99% of the crime perpetuated either from a fraud or a financial crime perspective, it's basic stuff, by the way, right? If we get our house in order, you can prevent it. It's proceeds of crime. How do you layer that money and how do you launder that money? And I think we can prevent that. Exactly the same on fraud. Look at the scams. 95, 98% of the scams are pretty basic. People click on a link, which is, you get an email saying, romance scams, and people work on that, and people fall for that. So it's taking, care of the vulnerability of the human brain. Mm-hmm. And I think as humans, we can tackle that. I don't believe this is we're giving more power to the machines type of a sci-fi environment. Don't believe that at all. I think it can be prevented. It's getting more sophisticated, no question about it. And for that top end, that cream, that's where concepts like quantum physics or quantum mechanics or quantum computing, more importantly, comes in, and how do you utilize data to do that better. But I think there's no replacement for good old-fashioned thinking about it and making sure you do the basics right, because often we forget about doing the basics right.
But we'll never get to that stage, will we? Because we are human beings. We are inveterably stupid sometimes. We are all capable of doing something
vulnerable
stupid.
Things. Exactly.
We're all vulnerable. So is there a stage? Do you envisage ever getting to a stage where it is beyond my capability, or do I have to accept my responsibility too?
Take videos.
Yeah.
You are in a romance scam. Now, obviously, you are not going to fall for a Nigerian prince for a meal. But if there's a person who you can talk to, who is live on video with you, but it could be deepfake. So those things are happening, but maybe.
Like I said, I think it's an ever-evolving one, but my point is we get caught up in that stuff and we forget the basics, and it cannot be at the cost of doing the stuff that we do and the continuous education that we talked about. You got to do that, and then concentrate X percentage of your last effort on the sophisticated element of it.
There's a question from a gentleman over here.
Yeah, so I'd like to go back to the conference of villains that you mentioned at the beginning.
It's a good name.
Try to live that one down.
That's next year. But
So the question is, you imagine conferences where criminals actually gang up together and decide to commit financial crime. It is the view of the future of finance intelligence services. It's the view of the NatWest Group as well, that criminals act as a network, whereas financial institutions actually don't. So we mention technological innovation, we mention AI. What we don't mention is why do you have a view about the ability of financial services to work together to prevent financial crime?
I mean, I can give the short answer is because of competition. That's what scared a lot of folks the last few years. I think it's getting better. So I do work with a number of my peers across a number of different risk matters, and that is increasing. I think that the distance from the financial crisis has helped. We've moved into a new era of risk and compliance, is my view. But I agree with you. I think we can do more to collaborate. It'd be interesting in Jazz's view as well.
I'll give you a complementary view. For me, it's less about competition, it's about data privacy, right? How do you make the balance between the new stringent regulation on, I say new, relatively new, GDPR, and sharing data when you know that it's a needle in a haystack particularly, right? We just talked about the vast majority of customers of any financial institution are good customers with the good intent and the right intent, right? And therefore, how do you make sure that whatever sharing happens strikes the right balance between not breaking data privacy obligations versus coming together? And there is a lot happening, by the way, in the background. Personally, I believe it's a lot better on the fraud side than on the AML or financial crime side. I think we've got greater opportunity and work to do as banks or financial institutions across the country to get to the same level of maturity like there are in terms of data sharing on the fraud side. A little bit easier when you've got like central white lists of politically exposed or sanctioned individuals or companies. That's the easy bit to do. That already happens in its level of sophistication. But exchanging data on individual potential criminals, a little bit more difficult to do, as you can imagine. I wouldn't want my information to be shared with anybody and everybody. I'm a good customer, I'm not a criminal. And can you imagine that starts to happen openly? It's going to be an all-out war on data privacy. So it's how do you strike that balance? I think it's step by step.
And we are seeing some groups in the space that are, for example, when an institution, in addition to issuing an SAR, we're seeing some groups that will take a consortium of that data and share it out to others. They're small. We're not seeing the level of uptake that I'd like, but I remember there was one a few years ago where, long story short, it ended up being a college student in Toronto. But there was this massive spike in the velocity of transactions and onboards for essentially a single apartment in Toronto with all sorts of different names and corporate names and all this other information. But they were able to essentially triangulate that and realize that there was thousands of transactions out of nowhere for a single apartment in Toronto and shut down everything associated with it across multiple MSBs and financial institutions. So I'd love to see more of that. But like you said, it's a little easier on the fraud side. It's a little harder on the actual financial crime end of things.
How do you manage it down your chain of suppliers in the security world and all of your suppliers? Because we've seen a lot of data breaches and crime perpetrated upon not the main organizations, but through suppliers who've got a sideways entry into your systems and into your ecosphere. How do you manage that?
Sorry, go on.
No, that's all right, Jazz.
I think third-party risk management, which is where this comes from. The regulation is super clear on that, particularly in the UK, and B, obligation of a financial institution for its customers as a result is super clear, right? It doesn't matter whether you have a third party or a fourth party or a fifth party doing something for you. The obligation sits with you, and particularly from a senior manager regime point of view in the last fair few years, I think everybody understands what the responsibility is as a leader in the organization. I know if I contract with XYZ third party, the obligation is on me to make sure the checks and balances are there. So what you'll find is onboarding of new suppliers, for example, that is fundamentally one of the criteria of choosing your partners and vendors going forward,
It hasn't
as
stopped the
compared to
crime,
just
though.
a commercial consideration.
It hasn't stopped the crimes.
I agree it hasn't stopped the crimes, but that's exactly what we talked about before. The criminals are becoming more sophisticated,
Sure.
but the diligence is maturing and maturing and maturing.
With it, yeah. There's been, I mean, I'm talking about the UK, there has been a historic resistance to ID systems, certainly in this country and many others. Having said that, everyone gives away all of their data, don't we, to our supermarkets and our banks and everybody else, but that's another point. Is it a more difficult job to ensure ID security in a place like this country compared to others where ID systems are much more welcomed?
Yes, I think is the short and easy answer to that.
And then what do you do?
Well, and what I think is fascinating, though, is there's some great studies, to your point, about people are very protective over their PII and their personal information unless you offer them a pound or two. And once you do that, people are incredibly liberal with their PII. So there's vast amounts of information out there on each of us. And I think when you look at the vulnerability, when you look at what I was talking about earlier with some of the implications for inclusion for different ethnic groups and genders, it seems obvious to me that this is a place the government has to step in. So the British actually invented the photo ID in 1915 to prevent German spies, and in a lot of ways. And then everybody gave up, and the technology. Well, we put some holograms on it, but I think it's time for governments to recognize that this technology is 110 years old, and really move towards a state-controlled digital identity.
Agree. We've got 5 minutes left. There's 2 themes I would love to cover. My own personal interest is following central bank digital currencies. Will that be any form of game changer for the ill or for the good in terms of fraud, financial crime, digital ID? Does that change anything, or is it just yet more?
I can see it helping if it's done in the right way, which is a fairly standard response from a CRO about a new regulation. We face into a great deal of regulatory change and things that have been decades in coming, and that I see that as a transformation if it's done right. I genuinely do.
But does it open up more threat?
It's the controls that you place around it, of course. So, and then you end up back in the same position that we were talking about just now in that race, because of course there's sheer value in being able to defraud people of that new value stock. It's not just the PII now; it's actually value in itself. So, I think that's the way that it would go. But it's not something that we're looking at actively, not until we see a little bit more in terms of future direction.
Yeah. Any other thoughts before we?
I think it's one of those where before faster payments came into this country, everybody was clamoring for why does it take so long to send a payment that I need to send to XYZ recipient, right? And faster payments has come in, and for the vast majority, it's helped the tens of millions of customers of financial institutions, and as an individual, makes it much easier and convenient for me. There are some downsides we just talked about. Once the money goes, it goes, right?
Yeah,
so it perpetuates fraud in particular more often. But that's the downside of any new evolution of technology and for me, digital currencies is exactly the same. It'll bring a whole load of benefits. To your point, Matt, we've got to be careful around some of the controls to make sure the downsides are controlled and limited. Fairly generic one, but we've got tons of examples over the past. You can't stop innovation. You've got to encourage innovation in the right manner because the benefits far outweigh, the downside.
Good answer. Well, that brings me to my final question. What am I going to see in the next couple of years to keep me safe? More education from you guys and more collaboration, I think we've already decided, and a conference of international criminals, which we're going to keep on the back burner. But seriously, what are we going to see in the next year or two that's going to transform?
I'm going to say education,
Okay.
and education. Definitely, you'll see more from from our side.
Because it's in your interest to reduce the impact upon the banks.
I think it's in the interest of the customers and us. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
No question about it.
Yeah.
Right? And you will see more sophistication in terms of deployment of AI to be able to prevent that needle in a haystack moment, or to find that needle in a haystack moment more often in a more pointed and in a rapid manner.
I agree with all of that. I think we've probably focused as an industry the last few years too much on preventative controls. And actually, I think detective will start to play a larger part. So particularly deploying AI as part of transaction monitoring in particular, you'll start to identify patterns and trends and unusual behavior on behalf of customers. AI makes that possible at a fantastic scale. And then you're back to using humans to look at these things on an individual basis should the AI flag it up. I think there's a huge potential to make use of that in future.
Thank you. And last thought, Daniel.
Official, authoritative electronic IDs.
Bring it in.
Yes.
Righty-ho. Well, look, we are exactly on time and we must finish. Panel, thank you very much indeed. It's been absolutely enlightening. We are going to look at a panel of international criminals for next year. That's going to be brilliant. If anybody would like to, pardon?
Yeah, I'll be there.
If anybody would like to join in, but maybe you're watching online, then just send us an email by Proton Mail or something.
Telegram.
But. So thank you to our panellists very much indeed, and that's the last session here from Stage 2 at FinTech Live London 2024. So thank you very much for attending. Gents, thank you.